It all started in AP Calculus, third period, on a rainy Tuesday in September. I was doodling mindlessly in the margins of my notebook when Ms. Rodriguez announced we'd be working with assigned partners for the semester's group projects. As the class's unofficial math genius, and yes, I know how that sounds, I was already mentally preparing myself to carry whatever unfortunate soul got paired with me. Olivia Mitchell and James Cooper. I glanced up at the mention of my name, scanning the room until I spotted him, James Cooper, star quarterback of Winston High's football team, shifting uncomfortably in his seat at the back of the class. I knew of him, of course, everyone knew James. 6 feet tall, with perpetually tousled dark hair and the kind of smile that made freshman girls walk into lockers. But I'd never actually spoken to him, despite sharing 3 classes this year. Our eyes met across the room, and he gave me a small wave that somehow managed to look both apologetic and hopeful. Great. Another jock who'd coasted through school on his athletic abilities, probably expecting me to do all the work while he focused on leading the Warriors to state championships. Partners will work together on all major assignments this semester, Ms. Rodriguez continued, adjusting her cat-eye glasses. Including the final project, which will count for 30% of your grade. I suggest you exchange contact information and set up a study schedule. The class shuffled around as people moved to sit with their new partners. James made his way to the empty seat next to me, nearly tripping over someone's backpack in the process. Up close, I noticed his eyes were an unusual shade of green, flecked with gold. "Hey," he said, running a hand through his already messy hair. I should probably warn you, I'm pretty terrible at math." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. "Don't worry about it. I can handle the calculations if you want to focus on the presentations." Actually, he looked genuinely embarrassed now. "I was hoping you might be willing to help me understand this stuff. I really need to keep my GPA up for college applications, and calculus is kind of kicking my butt." Something in his voice made me look at him more closely. There was none of the entitled attitude I'd expected, just genuine concern and what looked like fear. That was new. Most athletes I'd tutored treated math like a necessary evil, something to endure rather than understand. "Sure," I found myself saying. "We could meet in the library after school? I usually stay late on Tuesdays and Thursdays anyway." His whole face lit up. "Really? That would be amazing. Thank you, Olivia." "Just call me Liv," I said, surprised by my own offer. I usually guarded my study time jealously, it was my ticket to MIT, after all. But something about James's earnest request had bypassed my usual defenses. That afternoon, I claimed my usual table in the back corner of the library, spreading out my color-coded notes and carefully annotated textbook. I had my system down to a science. Concepts in blue, formulas in red, examples in green. My friends teased me about being obsessive, but hey, it worked. I'd maintained a perfect 4.0 since freshman year. James showed up exactly on time, slightly out of breath like he'd rushed from practice. His hair was still damp from the locker room shower, and he smelled faintly of mint and something woodsy, probably some expensive athlete body spray. But what caught my attention was the state of his calculus notebook. It was a disaster. Pages were crumpled, notes scattered haphazardly with no apparent organization. Several coffee stains decorated the corners, and there were what looked like play diagrams sketched in the margins. Yet as he flipped through it, I caught glimpses of something else, detailed questions written in surprisingly neat handwriting, circled problems with multiple attempts at solutions, even some sticky notes marking particularly troublesome concepts. "I know it's a mess," he said, catching my expression. "But I really have been trying. It's just, everything gets jumbled up in my head. Like, I'll think I understand something in class, but then when I try to do the homework, it's like trying to read a foreign language." I nodded, familiar with the feeling from my struggles with Spanish class. "Okay, let's start with the basics. What specifically about derivatives is giving you trouble?" What followed was 2 hours of the most surprising tutoring session of my life. James asked questions, good questions, actually. He took notes in that unexpectedly neat handwriting, drew diagrams to visualize the problems, and showed a level of dedication I hadn't anticipated. When he finally understood a particularly tricky concept about related rates, his face lit up with genuine excitement. "That's actually really elegant," he said, staring at the solution we'd worked out together. "The way all the pieces fit together. It's kind of beautiful, isn't it?" I stared at him, thrown completely off balance. In 3 years of tutoring, I'd never heard anyone else describe math that way. That was how I saw it, as a language of patterns and connections, an elegant dance of numbers and logic. But most people, especially the athletes I tutored, just wanted to know what would be on the test. "Yeah," I said softly. "It is." He looked up, catching my gaze, and for a moment something electric passed between us. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. "Shoot, I'm late for dinner." He started gathering his things. "Same time Thursday?" I nodded, still slightly dazed. "Sure. Bring the homework from tonight, and we can go over any problems you get stuck on." "Thanks, Lev. You're a lifesaver." He shouldered his backpack, then hesitated. "Hey, would you maybe want to grab coffee before school tomorrow? You know, as a thank you for helping me out?" My heart did a strange little flip. "Oh, sure. That would be nice." "Great. Meet you at the Daily Grind at 7:30? His smile was infectious. I watched him leave, trying to process what had just happened. James Cooper, star quarterback and unofficial king of Winston High, had just asked me for coffee. And more surprisingly, I was actually looking forward to it. As I packed up my own books, I noticed he'd left something behind, a crumpled worksheet that had fallen under the table. I picked it up, intending to return it tomorrow, when something caught my eye. In the margin, next to a particularly complex problem, was a series of calculations. Correct calculations. Advanced calculations that went well beyond what we'd covered in class. I frowned, studying the paper more closely. The handwriting was definitely James's, but the level of mathematical understanding displayed was far beyond someone who was terrible at math. In fact, some of the techniques he'd used were college level. Before I could process what this meant, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thanks again for today. You explain things way better than Ms. Rodriguez. James." I stared at the message, then back at the worksheet with its mysteriously advanced calculations. Something wasn't adding up here, and for the first time in my life, I had no idea how to solve the equation. Little did I know, this was just the first of many puzzles James Cooper would present me with, puzzles that would challenge everything I thought I knew about math, about people, and about myself. The Daily Grind was already buzzing with preschool activity when I arrived at 7:25 the next morning. The small cafe, with its exposed brick walls and perpetually steamy windows, was a favorite among Winston High students, mainly because the owner, Mrs. Chen, made the best caramel lattes in town and pretended not to notice when seniors skipped their study hall periods to camp out at the corner tables. James was already there, sitting at a window booth with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled suspiciously like Mrs. Chen's famous cinnamon rolls. His calculus textbook was open on the table, and he was frowning at something on his phone. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "You're early." He looked up, quickly putting his phone away, and that now familiar smile spread across his face. "Morning. I wasn't sure how you take your coffee, so I got one black and one with cream and sugar. And Mrs. Chen's rolls were fresh out of the oven, so..." "Black is perfect, actually," I said, reaching for the cup. Our fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected tingle up my arm. "Thanks. A girl who takes her coffee black. I should have guessed, it's very on brand for a math genius." I rolled my eyes, but I was smiling. Just because I understand calculus doesn't make me a genius. Speaking of which, I pulled out the worksheet he'd left behind yesterday. "I think this fell out of your notebook." Was it my imagination, or did something flicker across his face? Worry? Fear? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Oh, thanks. I was looking for that." He took the paper, quickly stuffing it into his backpack without looking at it. "Those calculations in the margin were interesting," I said carefully, watching his reaction. "Especially the use of multivariate calculus. We won't cover that until next semester. James's hand froze on his coffee cup. For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then he laughed, but it sounded forced. Oh, that? I was probably just copying something from the internet. You know, trying different approaches. Before I could press further, he launched into a series of questions about last night's homework, effectively changing the subject. I let it drop, but the mystery of James Cooper was only getting deeper. Over the next few weeks, our study sessions became a regular thing. Twice a week in the library, plus coffee before school on Wednesdays when James didn't have early football practice. He was an attentive student, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine interest in understanding the concepts. But occasionally, I'd catch glimpses of something more, a flash of advanced understanding in his questions, a sophisticated approach to problem solving that seemed at odds with his claimed struggles. "You're spending an awful lot of time with Cooper," my best friend Rachel commented during lunch one day, waggling her eyebrows suggestively. "Anything you want to share with the class?" "It's not like that," I protested, though my cheeks felt warm. "I'm just helping him with calc." Aha! Rachel was unconvinced. "And that's why you've started wearing lip gloss to your study sessions?" I touched my lips self-consciously. Okay, so maybe I had started putting a little more effort into my appearance lately. And maybe I looked forward to our study sessions more than I wanted to admit. But there was something else bothering me, the growing certainty that James was hiding something. It wasn't just the advanced math that occasionally slipped through his careful facade. There were other things, the way he'd sometimes answer his phone during our sessions, speaking in hushed tones and what sounded like, "Was that Chinese?" The mysterious texts that made him frown and occasionally rush off early. The fact that despite being on the football team, he never seemed to actually attend the post-game parties everyone talked about. Things came to a head during our study session before the midterm. We were working on optimization problems when James's phone buzzed for the third time in 10 minutes. He glanced at it, his face going pale. "I'm sorry, I have to go," he said, hastily gathering his things. "Family emergency." "James, wait." I grabbed his wrist. "What's going on?" "And don't say nothing, I'm not stupid. I've seen the advanced math you try to hide. I've heard you speaking Chinese. Something's not adding up here, and as someone who's been tutoring you for weeks, I think I deserve the truth." He stared at me for a long moment, conflict clear in those green gold eyes. Finally, he sighed. "You're right. You do deserve the truth. But I can't, not here. Not now." "Then when?" Another text made his phone buzz. He looked at it, swore under his breath, then made a decision. "Tomorrow night. Meet me at the Daily Grind at 8 p.m., after it closes. Mrs. Chen will let us in the back door. I'll explain everything, I promise." Then he did something completely unexpected. He leaned down and kissed my cheek, so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. "You really are a genius, Liv," he whispered. "I just hope you don't hate me when you find out why I needed you to believe I wasn't." He was gone before I could process what had just happened, leaving me standing there with my hand pressed to my cheek and my mind racing with possibilities. That night, I barely slept. I kept turning over every interaction with James in my head, trying to make sense of it all. The advanced math. The mysterious phone calls. The careful way he maintained his image as a slightly struggling athlete. None of it added up to a coherent picture. I was so distracted the next day that I almost missed the whispered conversations in the hallway. Something about a break-in at a tech company in Hartford. Something about sophisticated computer systems being hacked. Something about the FBI being involved. But what really caught my attention was the group of men in suits who showed up during sixth period, asking questions about James Cooper. He wasn't in calculus that day. Or any of his other classes. His phone went straight to voicemail when I tried calling. By the time 8 p.m. rolled around, I was a mess of nerves and theories, each more outlandish than the last. I stood outside the Daily Grind's back door, wondering if I was making a huge mistake. The cafe was dark, but I could see a faint light coming from the kitchen. Just as I was about to knock, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The truth is like a mathematical proof, elegant but sometimes dangerous. Be careful what you solve for. J. Attached was a sequence of numbers that looked like, no, that couldn't be right. But the more I stared at it, the more certain I became. It was a code. And I was pretty sure I knew how to break it. What I didn't know was whether I really wanted to discover what James Cooper had been hiding all this time. Because some equations, once solved, can never be unseen. The numbers on my phone screen seemed to pulse in the darkness. 3.14159 26,535 89,793 23,846 26,433 83,279 50,288 41,971 69,399 37510. At first glance, it looked like the first 100 digits of pi. But there was something off about the spacing. The grouping wasn't random, it was deliberate. My mind started automatically breaking down the pattern, the way I'd done thousands of times in math competitions. A warm glow spilled out as the back door of the daily grind opened. Mrs. Chen stood there, her usually cheerful face uncharacteristically serious. "Olivia," she said softly. "Come in quickly." The cafe's kitchen was dimly lit, the familiar sense of coffee and cinnamon mixing with the late-night silence. Mrs. Chen locked the door behind us and led me through to the small office in the back. To my surprise, there was already someone waiting there, a tall Asian man in his 40s, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and an MIT sweatshirt. "Hello, Olivia," he said, standing up. "I'm Dr. David Zhang. I believe you've been tutoring my nephew." "Your nephew?" I blinked. "James is your nephew?" "Among other things." Dr. Zhang gestured for me to sit. "Though James Cooper isn't his real name. In China, he's known as Li Jian. And he's not exactly a high school student." My head was spinning. "I don't understand." "He's on the football team. I've seen him play." "Yes, he is quite good at maintaining his cover." Dr. Zhang's expression was grim. "But right now, he's in danger. And based on the message he sent you, he thinks you might be able to help." I pulled out my phone, showing them the number sequence. "It's not just pi, is it?" "No," Mrs. Chen spoke up. "It's an encryption key. One that uses mathematical constants to hide messages in plain sight. James Jian helped develop it." "The truth is," Dr. Zhang continued, "Jian is a mathematical prodigy. By age 15, he was already doing postdoctoral work in cryptography at Beijing University. But when he discovered his research was being used by certain organizations for cyber warfare, he decided to defect. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The FBI men at school today. Were not FBI, Mrs. Chen's voice was sharp. They were MSS, Chinese Ministry of State Security. They'd been tracking Jian for months. We managed to get him out of China last year, Dr. Zhang explained. Created a new identity, placed him in high school to hide in plain sight. It was working perfectly until last week, when someone tried to hack quantum dynamics in Hartford. The tech company from the news? A front for a joint US-Taiwan cybersecurity project. Someone used an advanced encryption method to break through their firewall, one very similar to Jian's original work. Now both sides think he's responsible. My mind was racing. But why would he need me to tutor him if he's some kind of math genius? Because he needed someone smart enough to understand what was really happening, a new voice said from the doorway. Someone who could see the patterns. I spun around. James, or Jen, stood there, looking exhausted but somehow still managing that crooked smile I'd grown so fond of. His usual athletic clothes were replaced by dark jeans and a black hoodie, and there was a fresh cut above his eyebrow. "I'm sorry for lying to you, Liv," he said softly. "But I needed to get close to you without raising suspicion. The tutoring was the perfect cover." "Close to me? Why?" He pulled out his phone, showing me a familiar-looking web page. My breath caught, it was my winning submission to last year's National Math Olympiad. The one where I developed a unique approach to solving complex encryption problems. Because you might be the only person who can help me prove my innocence, he said. Your solution in this competition, it's brilliant. You found a way to track encryption signatures back to their source. If we can use your method to analyze the quantum dynamics hack, we could prove it wasn't you, I finished, the mathematical implications already unfolding in my mind. Exactly. But we have to move fast. The real hackers are still out there, and both American and Chinese agents are closing in. Will you help me? I should have been terrified. Should have run straight to the police. Instead, I found myself staring at the boy who had pretended to need help with derivatives while secretly being a mathematical genius. The boy who had kissed my cheek and apologized for lying. The boy whose life was now literally in my hands. Show me the encryption data, I said. The next few hours were a blur of numbers, codes, and countless cups of Mrs. Chen's coffee. Jian and I worked side by side, our mathematical minds in perfect sync. It was exhilarating, watching him work at his full capability, no more pretending to struggle with basic calculus. His mind was like a precision instrument, cutting through complex problems with elegant efficiency. Look at this, I said around 2 a.m., pointing to a pattern in the code. The signature's almost identical to yours, but there's a subtle difference in the prime number spacing. Jian leaned close, his shoulder pressing against mine. You're right. It's like they tried to copy my method but didn't understand the underlying theory. This could be our proof. A sharp knock at the front door made us all freeze. Through the cafe's windows, we could see several dark SUVs pulling up outside. Time's up, Dr. Zhang said grimly. They've found us. We need maybe 10 more minutes to complete the trace, Jian said, fingers flying over his laptop keyboard. You don't have 10 minutes. Mrs. Chen was already moving, pulling up a trapdoor in the office floor that I'd never noticed before. The tunnel leads to the old subway maintenance room. David, take them through. I'll hold them off. Auntie. Jian started to protest. Go, she commanded. I'd been running this cafe for 20 years. Those men don't scare me. As Dr. Zhang ushered us toward the trapdoor, I heard the front door of the cafe being broken down. Mrs. Chen's voice rang out in rapid-fire Mandarin. Then we were descending into darkness, the trapdoor closing above us. The tunnel was narrow and damp, lit only by our phone screens. We moved as quickly as we dared, the sounds of commotion from above growing fainter. Why did you really choose me? I whispered to Jian as we followed his uncle through the darkness. There must have been other mathematicians who could have helped. He was quiet for a moment. You want the truth? I watched you in math club meetings for weeks before arranging to be your calculus partner. The way you approached problems, the elegance of your solutions. I'd never seen anyone think the way you do. Not even in Beijing. And then? Then what? Then I got to know you. Really know you. And somewhere between pretending to struggle with derivatives and drinking black coffee at the daily grind, I stopped pretending to like you and started actually falling for you. Before I could process this confession, a shout echoed through the tunnel behind us. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. They must have found the trapdoor, Dr. Zhang said urgently. Quickly. We ran, the sound of pursuit growing closer. My lungs burned, but my mind was racing even faster than my feet. Something about the code we'd been analyzing, about the pattern of the hack. Jian. I grabbed his arm. I know who did it. He spun to face me, eyes wide in the phone's glow. What? The prime number spacing, it's not just similar to your work, it's derived from it. But the application is all wrong, like someone who had access to your research but didn't fully understand it. Someone who was there in Beijing. Understanding dawned on his face. Someone like my old professor. The one who tried to stop me from defecting. A bullet pinged off the tunnel wall near our heads. Less talking, more running. Dr. Zhang shouted. But as we fled through the darkness, I could see Jian's mind working, putting the pieces together just as I had. We had our proof, now we just had to live long enough to use it. The tunnel curved sharply, and suddenly we could see moonlight ahead. We were going to make it. We were going to. Another shot rang out. Jian cried out, stumbling. I caught him as he fell. Jian! Blood was spreading across his hoodie, but his eyes were clear as they met mine. Liv, the code, you have to. Then the moonlight was blocked by dark figures, and everything went black. I woke up to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the smell of antiseptic. My head felt like it was stuffed with cotton, and there was a dull ache at the base of my skull. As my vision cleared, I realized I was in a hospital room, but not any hospital I recognized. Welcome back, Miss Mitchell. A woman in a crisp suit sat in the chair beside my bed. I'm Agent Sarah Carter, NSA. How much do you remember? The memories came flooding back, the tunnel. The gunshots. Jian bleeding in my arms. Where is he? I tried to sit up, ignoring the wave of dizziness. Is he? Mr. Li is in surgery, Agent Carter said, her expression carefully neutral. The bullet missed any vital organs, but he lost a lot of blood. Dr. Zhang is with him. And Mrs. Chen? Safe. Currently helping our cyber team analyze the data you two uncovered. She leaned forward. Which brings us to why I'm here. We need you to walk us through what you discovered about the quantum dynamics hack. I closed my eyes, forcing my foggy brain to focus. The encryption signature, it was designed to look like Jian's work. But there were inconsistencies in the prime number spacing. Only someone who had access to his original research but didn't fully understand the theoretical foundations would make those mistakes. Professor Wei Zhang. Agent Carter nodded. Jian's former advisor at Beijing University. You knew? We suspected. But we needed proof that couldn't be dismissed as Western propaganda. Having a renowned Chinese mathematician's protege identify his specific mathematical fingerprint? That's the kind of evidence that can't be ignored. A nurse entered, checking my vitals. Agent Carter waited until we were alone again before continuing. What you may not know is that Professor Zhang isn't just a mathematician. He's a key figure in China's cyber warfare program. The quantum dynamics hack wasn't just about framing Jian, it was a test run for something bigger. My mind raced through the implications. The encryption method, if they've modified Jian's work for cyber attacks. They could potentially breach any security system in the world, she finished grimly. Unless someone could design a counter-encryption, I said, the mathematical possibilities already unfolding in my mind. Using the flaw I found in their prime number spacing. Exactly. Agent Carter smiled. That's why we need you, Miss Mitchell. Your approach to encryption problems is unique. Combined with Jian's original work, it might be our best chance at stopping this. I want to see him first. She hesitated. He's still in recovery. I don't care. I'm not helping until I see him with my own eyes. Maybe it was something in my voice, or maybe the NSA was just more reasonable than movies had led me to believe, but 20 minutes later I was being wheeled into another room and the secure wing of what I'd learned was a military hospital. The NSA's Cyber Command Center looked exactly like you'd expect from movies, wall-to-wall screens displaying scrolling code, dozens of analysts typing frantically at their stations, and a general atmosphere of controlled chaos. Except this wasn't a movie, and the attack scrolling across the main screen was very real. Professor Zhang's team has already breached the firewalls of 3 major financial institutions, Agent Carter explained, leading us through the facility. Jian was beside me in a wheelchair, still pale but insistent on being here. They're using a modified version of your encryption method to bypass security protocols faster than we can patch them. Show me the attack pattern, Jian said, his voice stronger than it had been in the hospital. A technician brought over a laptop, and we both leaned in to study the code. Look at this, I pointed to a recurring sequence. He's still using the same flawed prime number spacing we identified. If we can exploit that weakness. But we'd need processing power we don't have, Jian finished my thought. The calculations would take hours, even with the NSA's computers. By then, it would be too late. Unless. I bit my lip, an idea forming. What if we didn't try to stop all the attacks at once? What if we focused on predicting where they'll hit next? Jian's eyes lit up with understanding. The pattern, it's not random. He's using my original research paper as a base template. The attack sequence follows the same mathematical progression I used in my thesis. English, please, Agent Carter interrupted. Professor Zhang is brilliant but predictable, I explained. He teaches the same way he attacks, following established patterns, building from basic principles to complex applications. If we can identify the underlying mathematical sequence, we can get ahead of him, Jian finished. Cut him off before he reaches his main target. Which is? The Federal Reserve, a new voice said. We turned to see Dr. Zhang entering the room, looking grave. Our intelligence suggests he's using the smaller attacks as cover for something bigger. If he can breach the Fed's systems, he could destabilize the entire U.S. economy, Agent Carter said grimly. We need a quantum computer, I said, the calculations already running through my head. Something powerful enough to process the predictive algorithms in real time. There's one at MIT, Dr. Zhang offered. I have clearance. No time, Agent Carter cut him off. The nearest quantum computer that's operational and secure is right here in the building. But it's never been used for this kind of real-time application. The risk of system failure is less than the risk of doing nothing, Jian said firmly. He looked at me. But we'll need to work together. Your predictive models combined with my encryption knowledge might just be crazy enough to work, I finished, smiling despite the tension. The next few hours were a blur of coding, complex mathematics, and more coffee than was probably healthy. Jian and I worked in perfect sync, our minds flowing together like two streams joining into a river. It was like our tutoring sessions in the library, but with infinitely higher stakes. The pattern is evolving, Jian muttered around hour 3. He's learning, adapting. But still following the same basic progression, I pointed out. Look, the Fibonacci sequence underlying the prime number distribution. He can't help himself. Even his adaptations follow mathematical rules. Just like when he taught me, Jian said softly. Every lesson, every problem, building on what came before. He never could accept that sometimes the most elegant solutions come from breaking the rules. As if to prove his point, a new alert flashed across the screens. Another bank's firewall had fallen. 10 minutes until they reached the Fed's outer defenses, an analyst called out. I looked at Jian, saw my own determination reflected in his eyes. Ready to break some rules? His answering smile was fierce. With you? Always. We launched our counterattack, our fingers flying over keyboards as we implemented our hybrid solution. It was beautiful, really, a marriage of his pure mathematical theory and my practical problem-solving approach. We used the quantum computer's processing power not to fight the attacks directly, but to predict and redirect them, creating a mathematical maze that turned Professor Zhang's own patterns against him. It's working, someone shouted. On the main screen, we could see the attack algorithms starting to falter, caught in our carefully crafted trap. Then everything went wrong. New attack pattern detected, an analyst called out. They're abandoning the previous approach, this is something completely new. Impossible, Jian breathed, staring at the code. This isn't Professor Zhang. This is... Hello, little brother, a new window popped up on our screen, showing a familiar face, a young woman who looked remarkably like Jian. Did you really think Professor Zhang was working alone? May? Jian looked like he'd seen a ghost. But you're supposed to be... in prison? Dead? Amazing what people will believe when you want them to. Her smile was cold. You're not the only mathematical prodigy in the family, Jian. Though I have to admit, your American girlfriend's work is impressive. Those predictive algorithms, very elegant. I felt Jian tense beside me. Leave her out of this, May. Too late for that. She's part of this now. Just like you were supposed to be. We could have done amazing things together, little brother. Changed the world. By destroying it? By reshaping it. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, and our carefully constructed defenses began to crumble. But now I'll have to do it alone. Goodbye, Jian. I'm sorry it had to end this way. The attack intensified, our screens filling with cascading failure notices. The quantum computer's processors whined in protest as they tried to keep up with the new assault. We're losing it, an analyst shouted. 5 minutes to total system breach. I looked at Jian, saw the conflict in his eyes as he stared at his sister's face on the screen. Then he looked at me, and something shifted in his expression. The elegant solution isn't always the simplest one, he said softly, echoing his note from the hospital. Then he turned to address the room. Kill the quantum computer's safety protocols. Give us full access to the raw processing power. That could fry the entire system, Agent Carter protested. It's our only chance, I said, understanding where he was going. We need to break free from conventional patterns, do something so mathematically chaotic that even a genius couldn't predict it. You'll only have one shot, Dr. Zhang warned. The processors won't survive that kind of strain for more than a minute. 1 minute is all we need, Jen said, his hands poised over the keyboard. He looked at me. Together? I placed my hands next to his. Together. What followed was the most beautiful minute of mathematics I'd ever experienced. Jen and I moved as one, creating something that was neither American nor Chinese, neither purely theoretical nor purely practical. It was mathematical jazz, improvised yet precise, chaotic yet controlled. We threw out traditional encryption methods, creating a hybrid system that combined higher-dimensional mathematics with quantum uncertainty principles. It was messy, inelegant, and absolutely brilliant. What are you doing? May's voice held a note of panic for the first time. This can't. Her image dissolved into static as our counterattack hit home. Around the room, screens began returning to normal as the malicious code was neutralized. Federal Reserve firewall secure, an analyst reported. All systems returning to normal. We did it. The quantum computer gave one final whine and went dark, its processors burned out but victorious. In the sudden quiet, I became aware that Jian was holding my hand. Not bad for a girl who supposedly helped me with derivatives, I said, squeezing his fingers. His laugh was tired but genuine. Not bad for a quarterback who pretended to be bad at math. 6 months later, I sat in the daily grind, sipping black coffee and working on college applications. Mrs. Chen, now officially recognized as an NSA asset, still made the best caramel lattes in town. The cafe had become something of a legend among local conspiracy theorists, though no one ever proved anything about secret tunnels or midnight gunfights. Jian's sister was in custody, along with Professor Zhang and their entire network. Jian himself had been officially cleared of all charges, though he'd had to testify before several closed congressional committees. His cover as James Cooper was officially retired, but he decided to stay in America, specifically, in Connecticut. MIT or Princeton, he asked, sliding into the booth across from me with 2 fresh coffees. Both, maybe, I said, accepting my cup. Their joint quantum computing program is interesting. Plus, I hear they have a pretty good football team. Very funny. He reached across the table to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. You know, I never did properly thank you for tutoring me in calculus. Pretty sure helping me save the global financial system counts as paying me back. Still. His smile was soft. I was thinking maybe we could get dinner tonight? I know this great Chinese place. Are you asking me on a real date? No secret missions, no coded messages, no international incidents? Just dinner. And maybe. He pulled out a folded paper covered in equations. We could look at this interesting problem I found involving nonlinear dynamics? I laughed, taking the paper. You're such a nerd. Says the girl who solved multi-dimensional encryption problems for fun. True. I leaned across the table and kissed him, tasting coffee and possibilities. But I'm your nerd. Outside, snow was falling on Winston High School, where the calculus class still whispered about the mysterious quarterback who disappeared mid-semester. Sometimes, on quiet afternoons, I'd remember that first tutoring session in the library, when I thought I was helping a struggling athlete understand derivatives. Turns out I was wrong about a lot of things. But being wrong had never felt so right.